Oscar was feeling a number of conflicting emotions today in rapid succession that he dearly wished he wasn't. General discomfort and irritation of returning to unbelievably cold Northrend to trade with the primitive natives who barely understood the value of coin, excitement of the potential turn of profit they would get trading cheap ores for much more valuable exotic goods that would sell well back home, outrage at being told by these walrus people that they would have to renegotiate their standard deal with them, surprise at learning about their new trading partner, glee at the thought of trading with a proper kingdom and the opportunities it would open up in the market with him and his associates at the forefront of it, to terror to finding out these Nerubians were spider people of all things, and finally now, desperately trying to maintain his years-long honed trader's face as he tried to maintain eye contact with said spider people. It was easier said than done considering it was hard to figure out which set of eyes he should be focusing on. Still, his pride as a trader would not let him lose such a valuable opportunity standing right before him, so even as he sweated in his heavy furs despite the cold of the continent he kept up his practiced smile and opened up talks of trade with this Krivax. He was very curious about what this Azjol Nerub could potentially offer the Eastern Kingdoms after all, ideally making trading missions to this continent much more worthwhile than previous visits. So when the Nerubians were done speaking with the Explorers League members and their discussions with the Walrus people were over, he took his chance and hoped for the best. He was not disappointed, and it did much to distract him from his fear. "This silk is marvelous," he said in undisguised awe as he was shown several sheets of the material, something that apparently the Nerubians could produce relatively cheaply, so most of the costs involved would end up being in transporting it. "Thank you," Krivax said with what Oscar thought was a smile. Thankfully, the magics of the chieftain's hut allowed them to communicate freely, so at least words were coming in clearly. It's pretty basic compared to what actually skilled weavers can do, but it has many uses even in its base form. I am aware since silk is a luxury material back home, only Dalaran and Quel'Thalas can produce it in any reasonable amount, and even then only the richest can afford it, Oscar explained. I am slightly afraid that if it's as easy to produce as you say that you could crash the market for it back home. Oh. That would not be good, I assume, Krivax said nervously. We could limit the amount we can trade at a time to reduce overall cost but not totally devalue it if that helps. That would likely be best, but for now it is no problem since few traders come to Northrend as is for the moment, though I'm sure that will change once word spreads, Oscar said. Your ores won't fetch as high of a price due to Ironforge's high output rate, but the prices of certain ones remain consistent for the most part so long as you moderate that as well. Good to know, Krivax nodded. There are likely many other things that my people can trade, but at this time this is the most I can offer personally. Of course, Oscar waved him off. This is plenty for the time being. Larger trade deals can be made later on as our relationship with your people grows. Sounds very good, though since we have no maritime tradition at this time we'll likely have to rely on your ships for transporting said goods. Krivax pointed out. We'll need to find enough ships and sailors for such, but I'm sure that can be arranged in time as well. Oscar nodded as he idly tried to figure out the logistics of such a system. Good, Krivax nodded. Now that we've gone over what my people can offer, I suppose now it's your turn to do the same. That does leave the question of what you need, Oscar fired back with an honest smirk. Not much to be honest, but magical reagents or luxury goods such as new foods and the like would likely interest my people and get them more interested in the surface world. It's been working with the Tuskar and shellfish after all, Krivax shrugged. I don't suppose you can offer tomes of knowledge, literature, philosophy, and arcane lore? Oscar came up slightly short but quickly recovered. While there are many tomes in the Eastern Kingdoms, most are in the ownership of the Church of the Holy Light, noble houses, royal libraries, and similar institutions who would be slow to part with such things easily, even for large amounts of gold, Oscar explained. And the vast majority of anything related to arcane magic can only be found among the High Elves and the Mages of Dalaran. Would they be up for a trade? Azjol Nerub has vast libraries full of knowledge accumulated over the course of thousands of years. I am sure they would find something among our collection worth swapping for, Krivax asked curiously. Thousands of years? Are we dealing with elves in spider form? Oscar's mind screamed, but he kept his features schooled. Perhaps, But that is something you would need to ask them directly, since I am simply a humble trader and sadly have no ties to such groups, Oscar admitted, knowing it was never good to build up your own image too high or else you wouldn't be able to live up to expectations. A shame, but understandable, since it's not like you knew about us at all. Krivax shrugged. Hopefully we can meet with representatives of said groups at a later date, but for now we would be happy to trade simple things with you that you are willing to part with, such as maps, books, and anything else you have on you currently that can help us learn more about your people. I believe I can arrange that, Oscar said, knowing that the captain has a small library in his cabin that he would need to beg and plead with to give up at least a decent amount of it with the promise of a larger cut of the silk profits. Excellent, then I hope this deal is most pleasing and that we can partake in more in the future, Krivax said with a nod as they sealed their agreement with a handshake, which had Oscar shiver as the Nerubian's clawed hand was placed in his own. Good profit or not, this will take getting used to. That is quite the tale, and certainly changes a lot, Captain Stanton Prescott admitted after Oscar gave the full version of events in private with the man. After he and the League members had returned to the ship to report back on the meeting with the Nerubians, the former had returned to the village to continue speaking with their newest acquaintances while he remained behind to talk with the captain about how this changed their mission on behalf of House Ashford. As it stands, even after negotiations with the Tuskar, we will be at a net loss for this whole journey. However, this news of a brand new and apparently quite wealthy and powerful kingdom stands to pay us back hundreds of times over if we play our cards right, Oscar explained. I will be going to the Nerubian city-state in a few days, and while there I hope to broker a larger trade deal with the city leadership, perhaps as payment for transporting a diplomatic delegation back to the Eastern Kingdoms, which will not only net us quite a profit, but House Ashford has first grabs at any new trade routes made and the glory of helping establish diplomatic ties with a foreign kingdom, the captain summarized as he rubbed his beard chin, which ought to seriously boost their reputation among the lorder on upper class. Exactly. This will be a massive coup, politically speaking, and House Ashford and the rest of us can ride the wave when it comes rather than be overtaken by it. Oscar couldn't help the slightly predatory grin that came to his face at the thought. Still sounds risky since these are giant spider people of all things, and from the sounds of it most of them are not the overly friendly sort, the captain pointed out as he took a drink of alcohol from the private stash he brought out during the report. Yes, but even the most isolationist kingdoms still want some things outside of their borders, for even the elves still trade with the human kingdoms despite not allowing us in theirs, Oscar pointed out. Elves don't eat people. As far as I know, the captain said. I've seen actual non-talking giant spiders wrap up and suck the juices out of men before. From all accounts, they have no interest in eating people, Captain. Oscar waved him off, but still couldn't get the image out of his head of the Nerubians happily crunching down on a crab shell and all. It's your neck that you're risking, so it's your choice in the end, the captain shrugged. Guess that means we'll be stuck here for a little bit while you work your magic. Gonna have to give the crew a bit of extended shore leave while you're gone, not that there is much to do here, and get them ready to most likely receive more unique-looking passengers then. Of course, if you aren't back in a week I'm gonna assume the worst and sail off. Fair enough, but I assure you it won't come to that, Oscar said, and privately hoped. This is the risk you merchants all take for coin and glory, I suppose, the captain laughed while Oscar chuckled since he couldn't deny that fact. If all went well, then he would become one of the richest men in the Eastern Kingdoms in a few short years, an image that made any risk seem worth it. Trixie had spent the past few days oscillating between terror and exhilaration about her impending diplomatic journey to the underground kingdom of the Spider People. Terror because no matter how many times Krivax reassured her, she knew that there was always a possibility that she would not leave Northrend alive, and exhilaration because she was about to see things no gnome had ever seen before. This was why she had chosen to join the Explorers League instead of becoming a tinker like the rest of her family. At least not as her main profession. A part of her wished that they could have gone immediately after they finished negotiations with the Tuskar, but there were preparations that needed to be made first. However, today would be the day that she, Muzzy, and Oscar would meet with the leaders of the Spider People and plead their case for a peaceful and diplomatic future between them and the Eastern Kingdoms. Now she was just waiting in the middle of the Tuskar village for Krivax's mage mentor to teleport in and open a portal that they could use to travel to the Spider Kingdom. She did wish that he would hurry up though. Unlike the Spider People, Her clothes didn't completely protect her from the cold. "Are you ready for this, lass?" asked Muzzy, looking just as nervous and excited as she felt. "As ready as I'll ever be, big man," Trixie said as confidently as she could. "How about you? How are you feeling about all of this?" "Not entirely sure how I should feel," Muzzy admitted reluctantly. "This ain't really something people can prepare for, is it? Still, if we make it out of here then we'll probably end up the most famous members of the League next to the Bronzebeard brothers and Moon and Magellas themselves." Trixie smiled at her friend's optimism. If she truly managed to become so famous, it would do a lot to help convince her family that she made the right decision in becoming an explorer. "Who cares about fame?" scoffed Oscar. The man was shivering and pulling on his fur coat, but that didn't seem to dampen his spirits at all. "If we succeed in forming a relationship with these spider people, we could all potentially become fabulously wealthy. What does fame matter in the face of that?" "I don't see how that would apply to me," Trixie said dubiously. "I'm an explorer, not a merchant." "That's simply because you lack vision," said Oscar bluntly. "If we make it back to the Eastern Kingdoms, then the three of us will be the ones who have the most experience dealing with these creatures. That fact alone will see any number of merchant guilds eager to solicit your aid at the least." She thought about the merchant's words and decided that while they had merit, it didn't matter much to her. She wanted to be an explorer, not run off to work for a merchant guild. Trixie turned her attention to the spider person wearing black and red robes who was quietly speaking to his friend in his harsh chittering language. Two smaller spider-like creatures with a thin membrane between their legs were currently sitting on his back. According to him, the creatures were the same species as him, except they weren't sapient? Except when they were? These two particular flyers were only about as intelligent as one of the hounds that humans seem to like so much, but there were apparently some that were as intelligent as a person. Trixie was doing her best not to think about it. "Krivax, how much longer until your mentor arrives?" Trixie asked while speaking Tuskar. "He should be arriving any time now," answered Krivax in the same language, turning his attention to her. "I'm not certain why he has not arrived yet, but Vizier Hadix has always preferred to move at his own pace." Trixie hummed an acknowledgement, even if she was not fully satisfied by the answer. She didn't appreciate being made to wait out in the cold, but Krivax was not the one who she should take her frustrations out on. He had been nothing but friendly and helpful these past few days and had done a lot to ease her worries. Trixie was just about to ask more about what they could expect from the Spider Kingdom when a bright violet light suddenly began to shine a few feet away from them. If she weren't wearing her goggles, then she would probably have been forced to turn her gaze away from the dazzling light, but as it was, she was able to watch as arcane glyphs formed on the ground and Vizier Hadix appeared in the center of the light. As Trixie strained her neck to look up at the spider person, she was once again befuddled by the variety of appearances of this race. Standing at what she estimated to be 10 to 12 feet tall, Vizier Hadix possessed 4 legs, 4 arms, and was wearing a set of extravagant teal robes and a headdress that would put even the wealthiest of mages to shame. He also seemed to exude a subtle air of danger that had the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. Trixie wasn't sure if it was just because she knew that he was a powerful mage, but her instincts told her that Vizier Hadix was not someone she wanted to get on the bad side of. The Vizier completely ignored everyone aside from Krivax and began speaking to him in their language. Trixie had no idea what they were saying, but she could tell that Krivax was acting much more respectfully while talking to the Vizier than he had ever acted with her or even the Tuskar chieftain. After a few moments, their conversation seemed to finish and the Vizier immediately began to cast a spell without any further comment. Trixie watched in awe as a portal quickly opened up a few feet in front of the Vizier, revealing several armored spider people waiting for them on the other side. She was no mage, but she was fairly certain that creating a portal was not a simple matter. "It's time," said Krivax. "Vizier Hadix won't hold the portal open for long, so we'd better get moving." With that said, the 2 spider people quickly made their way through the portal. After sharing a nervous glance with Muzzy, she decided to follow after them. The first thing Trixie noticed as she stepped through the portal was the relative warmth and complete lack of breeze. This was not particularly surprising given the fact that they were underground and there was a brazier in the corner of the room lit with a blue flame. The second thing she noticed was the intense focus that the armored guards were directing toward her. Trixie had the distinct feeling that if she had not been explicitly invited that she would have already been skewered by their spears. After a few moments, Mulsey and Oscar stepped through the portal as well and were forced to hastily move out of the way as the vizier followed behind them. The portal closed shortly afterward, leaving them with no way back. A few harsh clicks of spider talk from the vizier sent the armored guards moving to take a formation around them. "Follow us carefully," said Krivax. Trixie hurried to do just that as the spider people started to make their way out of the building they had portaled into. According to Vizier Hadix, "We need to start moving now if we wish to arrive there on time." Once they stepped out of the building, only the threat of the armored guards surrounding them prevented her from stopping and taking in her surroundings. Trixie was filled with a sense of awe as she looked at all the fantastical sights around her. She could tell that she was currently in a gigantic cavern that stretched farther than she could estimate and was filled with carefully constructed structures of an architectural style unlike any she had ever seen before. Gigantic webs of silk were carefully woven between different structures, serving as some kind of road for spider people to travel along, and groups of flyers freely flew throughout the cavern. There even seemed to be buildings suspended in the air purely by webs. Once she saw that Trixie couldn't help but try and calculate the approximate tensile strength of the spider people's silk. Unfortunately, she didn't have enough information to do so, and she was also busy trying her best to keep up with the rest of the group. Keeping up with big folk was hard enough when they only had 2 legs like she did. Thankfully, it seems like their destination was not far from wherever the portal brought them, because soon enough, they reached a massive ziggurat that was more ornately designed than the rest. It wasn't hard to guess that this was their destination. A few more harsh clicks to the guards from the vizier had their group entering without much fuss. Once they were inside, it was only a few more moments of frantically trying to keep up and ignoring the multitude of stares directed toward them before they reached the room that had been set aside for their meeting. She could tell that this was the correct room because waiting inside was a massive creature that matched Krivax's description of a spider lord. The 20-foot-tall creature possessed a bottom half that looked like a mixture between a beetle and a spider, a thick brown carapace, a large sharp horn, and scythe-like arms that were larger than Trixie's entire body. As their group made their way further into the room, she was also able to make out a pair of wings hiding behind its carapace. Of course, it's not enough to be a terrifying 20-foot-tall creature that could probably take on a dwarven steam tank, but they can also probably fly. Standing next to the Spider Lord was a similarly gigantic creature that Trixie assumed to be a queen. In terms of appearance, she wasn't actually all that different from the 2 spider people who she had spent the most time with. Aside from her massive size and the giant bloated abdomen behind her that Trixie assumed to be filled with eggs, the queen was also wearing jewel-encrusted anklets around her many legs, a set of pure white silk robes, and a wide fanning headdress similar to what the viziers wore. Trixie also noticed how the queen was being constantly tended to by at least half a dozen of those smaller spider creatures which were sometimes people and sometimes animals that Krivax called skitterers. She failed to hold back a shudder as she reduced the zooming function on her goggles. The queen's massive size only made it easier for Trixie to make out the details of her terrifying face. Standing behind and to the sides of the queen and the spider lord were 3 large statues with lower bodies and heads that resembled large cats, upper bodies that were similar to gnomes with 2 large sets of wings, and were each holding a large crystal in their clawed hands. Trixie assumed that they were larger versions of the magic crystals that she had seen Krivax use to contact the vizier. The closest equivalent that her own people had was a gnome corder, except a gnome corder was unable to transmit visual images. Unfortunately for Trixie, they were also not powerful enough to establish communication between continents, otherwise she may have been able to ask for advice from someone who actually knew what they were doing. Aside from the Spider Lord, Queen, skitterers, and the 3 out-of-place winged cat statues, there was also a multitude of spider people spread throughout the room. Trixie could see several groups of viziers standing off to the sides of the room and speaking quietly to one another, and several spider people sticking to the walls with their webs or hanging from the ceiling. After their group reached the center of the room and the spider people that had escorted them slipped into the crowd, the Spider Lord silenced the crowd with a few words before gesturing toward one of the groups of viziers. Trixie watched with trepidation as the viziers spread themselves throughout the room and began casting magic. Their purpose became obvious as an arcane glyph manifested itself across the floor of the room and the Spider Lord spoke words that Trixie was startled to find she could suddenly understand. Are you able to understand my words, outsiders? Asked the Spider Lord in a deep voice. Oh. Yes we can, Your Grace? Trixie said in a rush, speaking up for the group. She held back a grimace at her jumbled words. She hardly knew how to properly refer to human aristocrats, let alone spider aristocrats. Good, said the Spider Lord, seemingly uncaring of her ignorance. I am under King Kukarak. With me is Queen Melrose, and we are joined by the various leaders of the city of Killerhook. This meeting will also be observed via scrying crystal by High King Anubarak and his council, as well as the leadership of Inkiller and Nazanak. You are here to answer our questions about the land you refer to as the Eastern Kingdoms. Do you understand? Yes, under King Kukarak, Trixie said as politely as she could, struggling to pronounce the spider-person's strange name. You will begin by introducing yourselves, said the Spider Lord, his tone brooking no argument. I am Trixie Tinkrench of the Explorers League, said Trixie, only just now realizing that her words were being magically carried across the large room. They had previously decided that Trixie would speak for them when possible, so she quickly introduced her companions as well. With me are Malzy Stonehallow, also of the Explorers League, and Oscar Smythe, a merchant under the employ of House Ashford. Your first contact with our people was several days ago when you met with an initiate of the Circle of Viziers by the name of Krivax, correct? Yes, Underking, said Trixie. During this meeting, you shared details of your people and your lands with initiate Krivax, correct? Yes, that is correct, Underking. Repeat those details for those who are listening, ordered Underking Kukarak. Trixie winced. This was probably going to take a while. Trixie spent the next few hours answering all the questions asked of her in regard to the Eastern Kingdoms while doing her best to make the continent sound like one the Spider people would want to cooperate with. For the most part, the Spider Lord asked her about the Eastern Kingdom's politics, governments, and potential threats while the Queen asked her about its races, especially the elves and the trolls. Trixie answered what she could while Malzy and Oscar contributed by answering about subjects that they knew better. Some of the muttered responses to their answers, the source of which she could never quite find, were very interesting. It seems that these Eastern Kingdoms are politically stable enough and face only minor threats. Nothing that should drag us into anything unpleasant at first glance. So the foolish elves didn't wipe themselves totally out after all. We will need to update their status from extinct to merely misplaced. It is unfortunate that these new lands also have trolls. The Drakari are an annoyance enough as it is. It's possible that their damned lower knew about this the entire time. These other races sound fascinating. So much to study. Once they were done with those topics, one of the viziers stepped forward and asked them questions about magic. Unfortunately, she was able to answer very few of those questions, although the viziers did seem interested when she told them about Dalaran. After they finished answering questions about magic, the viziers switched to asking about the Eastern Kingdom's technology. Thankfully, Trixie was more than able to answer questions like that, and a demonstration of her shrink ray on an offered skitterer, which she was assured wasn't sapient, sent many of the viziers into a short frenzy that the Underking had to calm down himself. How in the world did such a small device reduce the mass and density of a living creature to such a degree without killing it? Does it function similarly to the reduce spell? Not only that, but this technology can be used by anyone. It's not unlike some of the low-level spell weaves. This goes far beyond the device that we studied earlier. Apparently, the small ones are the most technologically adept races on the continent. This opens up many possibilities. This will no doubt lead to the Technological Research Division getting a raise in funding. The vizier that Trixie recognized as Krivax's mentor stepped forward to ask about the potential for trade, and Oscar stepped forward to give his best presentation on the subject. The merchant spoke at length about the value of the Spider People's silken ores, and the various goods that the Eastern Kingdom could offer them in turn, focusing on foodstuffs, technology, and magical knowledge and supplies. To think these foreigners would be lacking in such basic resources. Pathetic. While it's doubtful that these lesser beings have much to offer that we can't produce ourselves, their knowledge and novelties might have some interest, at the very least. This Church of the Holy Light seems like an interesting research subject. I very much doubt they have anything we could not replicate ourselves. I wonder if they have any foods as delicious as shellfish. By the time they were done answering questions, Trixie could tell that the Underking was the only thing keeping the audience from breaking out into loud conversation. "Does anybody have any more questions for the outsiders?" asked Underking Kukarak. The room was quiet for several more moments before the Spider Lord continued. "Very well. The outsiders will be made to wait elsewhere while we discuss everything that we have heard." "Thank you for your time, Underking Kukarak," said Trixie as diplomatically as she could. "I hope the future of our people's relationship is one of cooperation." With that said, she and her companions turned to leave the room under the escort of the armored guards who had brought them there. Trixie had expected Krivax and Masruk to join them given they were the only ones who could communicate with them without magic. Apparently, they thought so as well since the two spider people moved to follow them before Krivax was stopped by his mentor. Trixie was barely able to hear what the vizier said to Krivax as she passed by them. "Not you," said the vizier. "You need to be here for the rest of this meeting. Your warrior friend will go with them." "Yes, vizier," said Krivax. After saying a few words to his friend that Trixie could not make out, Masruk nodded and moved to follow their group. As they left the room, Trixie couldn't find it in herself to wonder about the little byplay, because she had more important things to think about. Trixie was not entirely certain what caused it specifically, but halfway through the meeting, her instincts started to tell her that she had seriously underestimated the xenophobia of the spider people. Trixie had a very real feeling that there was a chance that they would not be allowed to leave safely. Now, the only thing she could bring herself to focus on was praying to any god that was listening that the discussion that the spider people were about to have would result in a decision that would allow her to see her family again.